Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to be doing an update on the EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulations. And there's been some recent movement. Last week, there was a vote at the EU Parliament that is going to may have a huge effect on the implementation of the EUDR. And today, we're going to do a deep dive into the topic of the EUDR and what it might mean for not only cocoa growers, but chocolate makers and users of chocolate around the world. But before we get there, I want to say thank you to every member of The Chocolate Life, because this episode, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. You can go there today. Here is the homepage of The Chocolate Life over here. And you can click on the green button up here. It will say join. I'm logged in. It will say join. And you can become a member and support the work that I do here. There's always a free membership level, but if you do have the financial resources to support the work that I do, they are always appreciated. And for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, what I do is I create a post. And here is the link to today's post. And here is the post for today's episode. And before I deep dive into this, what I'd like to say is that if you're watching today, no matter where in the world you're connected from, I don't need to know LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, but know where in the world you're connected in. Go into the live chat in YouTube, go into the comments, LinkedIn and Facebook, and let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I'll get the shout out up on screen. And then if you have a comment, something you'd like to share then I will get that up on screen. And if it's a question, I will attempt to answer it. And with all that said, let's get into the episode and talk about it. I'm not going to go into any in-depth discussion today about what the EUDR is. I have several posts that I've done over the course of the last little while. If you go to the magnifying glass and you type in EUDR, what you'll do is you'll see a list of episodes. And I realized that I probably haven't done an episode focusing on the EUDR in more than 50 episodes. So it's been a while. And when I get done, what I'll do is I'll put the links to these episodes into the post for today. But until then, you can go take a look and see my prior coverage and my prior posts on the EUDR, an explanation of what it is, why it's important, and things like that. But today, we're going to run past the run of show, the links, and all that kind of stuff, and talk about what's going on. So here's the highlight, the TLDR that I'm responding to, which is that with less than 6 months before the EUDR becomes law, the latest draft changes would drastically weaken. And when I say drastically weaken, I mean completely undermine and derail the original purpose and intent of the legislation, and have a knock-on effect to related legislation. So it has implications for the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and other things like that. So this is a huge deal. So what happened? Last week, the EU Parliament, this is on July 9th, so it's actually 2 weeks ago, on July 9th, the EU Parliament voted to amend the EUDR, with 2/3 of EU ag ministers pushing for a no-risk category. So what is a no-risk category? The original legislation said that there were some countries that posed higher risk of deforestation and some countries that posed lower, or some countries that posed a lower risk of deforestation, and that depending upon the risk level, there would be different requirements for reporting. Due diligence requirements, depth of reporting, a number of things. And then there were what the vote on the 9th was just to add another category, which is that there are some countries which represent no risk ends of deforestation. And so what we can do is we propose that we relax the reporting and due diligence requirements just even further, basically making them non-existent. So that's what the vote was about. And the vote is non-binding, which means that the larger parliament can decide to implement the changes or to delay the EUDR so that they can go think about these changes and decide whether to add these this new risk category to the directive. So but I want to point out, there is reporting on this that says the EUDR is designed to wipe out deforestation from EU supply chains. And that's not the case. The EUDR is not designed to wipe out deforestation from EU supply chains. What it selectively points to certain categories of agricultural commodities, right? So soy, palm oil, rubber, cocoa, coffee, beef, and timber, those 7, right? It proposes that there is a baseline year, right? And we're looking for any new deforestation after this time. So it doesn't wipe out deforestation. What it attempts to do is attempts to slow down the deforestation related to a selected list of commodities around the world, right? If those commodities are going to end up in the EU. So that's what it is. It doesn't wipe out deforestation. That's not a part of the EUDR directive at all. And I think it's really important to understand what the EUDR is and is not. So in the sort of kerfuffle, in the fog, which has been created, around this vote, different actors are urging different changes and different delays for different reasons. And what they're doing is they're pointing their fingers for the reasons it challenges at each end of the supply chain. So some of the reasons point to the farmers, and some of the reasons pointing to the EU regulators themselves. So, I thought about this. This is the image that I chose for today's episode. I try to create a thematic episode. And what we do is we have here a wasteland. We have a desolation around EUDR. It's like, is this the future, right? Of things that are going on. So I wanted to create this sort of, bleak existential angst around what it is that's going on. And then I also noticed that, I've got legislators as a singular, and should it be a plural possessive? So is it legislator singular? So, thinking about that is, just second guessing my editorial changes here and wondering what's going on there. But nonetheless, right? So one fact seems to stand out when it comes to the EUDR and at least proposing delays, right, is that no EU member state, right, nor is the EU central governance headquartered in Brussels, right? None of them is prepared to manage the cost and drain on resources and drain on other resources that the onslaught of data, which is collected and has to be reported to the EU, right? No EU member state individually, right? Because they are actually, each member state is responsible for overseeing how the EUDR will be implemented within their state. So none of the EU member states, nor the central governance, is prepared, has the computer systems, right, to handle the onslaught of compliance data, which is going to be generated by the EUDR. Apparently, no one thought about what it meant when they were crafting the legislation, crafting the resources that would be available to respond to the legislation, right? And what it would mean in terms of cost, IT resources, other sorts of resources. Nobody thought about it, right, at all, right? And so what I think is interesting here, and so by the way, there's a toggle on the page. That's what this thing here is. It's a toggle on the page. There's a little down arrow, which you can see, right? So, and this is part of the language that showed up in a letter which was signed by two-thirds of the European Union agricultural ministers, right? The ministers pointed out that instead of targeting deforestation where the risk is highest, so instead of targeting deforestation specifically in cocoa, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, countries like that, the regulation imposes disproportionate bureaucratic obligations on countries where deforestation is demonstrably insignificant. So again, this is the highlighted point, is like, we really didn't think about what the implications were going to be when it comes to how big do the data centers need to be? How many people do we need to employ? How many people are going to be involved? What are we going to use big data tools? Are we going to use artificial intelligence tools? What are we going to use to be able to go through and develop the forensic tools to determine if people are out of compliance. When they have to support all the data. We have to cherry pick who we're going to go and choose the audit. Nobody thought about that at all. And this is a smoking gun in terms of that understanding. But I think that's really funny about this. No, it's not. It is ironic and sad. Is this comment that is made is where deforestation is demonstrably insignificant. And the point that is lost here, and I think the point that is lost on many people who are looking at the EUDR, is it may be that ongoing deforestation, which is related to agriculture in the EU, is not happening. But we can point to large swaths of what 500 years ago was tree-covered expanses and is now open agricultural land, is now land which is now predominantly put towards the raising of livestock. All of the deforestation that has happened, not all of it, but the vast majority of deforestation that has happened in the EU has already happened, right? And what this legislation is about is reducing the amount of future deforestation. But to characterize this as deforestation is demonstrably insignificant is wrong. Ongoing new deforestation may be insignificant compared to that which has already been deforested, but that's a really important nuance to go point out. And there's another aspect of the straw man that is being erected about the purpose and the intent of the DR, and I'm going to get to that right at the end of what I'm talking about, because that's op-ed. That's going to be really a big opinion thing. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about something called the negligible risk, negligible risk loophole. What does that mean? So proposed draft changes introduce a new risk tiering system that includes, so it's adding new tiers to the existing risk tiering system. Okay? That includes negligible or very low risk countries, commodities originating from or transiting through these designated countries. So what that means, if I'm a big cocoa company, I could buy my cocoa from lands that are not mapped and which deforestation is going on. I could transit that cocoa, let's say from Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, to the United States. The United States probably is going to be classified as a negligible risk or no risk country. And as long as that cocoa goes through the United States before it goes to the EU, it will be exempt or, from rigorous scrutiny by the EUDR. What? Right? That, as I say, when it says it completely undermines and derails the purpose and intent of the EUDR, that aspect, transiting through a low-risk country, turns cocoa from a high-risk country to low risk, no risk, or negligible risk, makes zero sense whatsoever. The transiting through aspect of it is wrong. It's just wrong. It is bad policy. It is like, we've been promising you all these things over the last couple of years associated with UDR, and now what we're doing is we're saying, psych, right? We're gonna have an entirely different take on these things. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be negligible or very low risk? Number one, you're going to be exempt from key due diligence checks, including plot level GPS data and supply chain mapping. What? I mean, the whole idea of saying, here's the GPS boundary of a farm, we've already mapped the GPS boundaries of deforested lands, and what we need to do is we need to make sure that the farm boundaries, right, do not overlap with newly deforested areas that we've identified from satellite and other mapping data. So the whole idea is that we've forced companies to spend millions of dollars, not just companies, but governments, and to spend millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars to get plot level boundary data, right? And psych, right? All that the buyer has to do is, I can be a big company like Olam. What I can do is I can buy the cocoa in Nigeria. Olam is one of the biggest buyers in Nigeria. All they have to do is say that the, transiting through, and I don't even know if they sent a container from like Port Harcourt in Nigeria to the port of New York and New Jersey in the United States. Just transiting through means I have to take it off the ship and put it back on another ship. Do I have to take it off the ship, run it through customs, and or can I take it off the ship in a free trade zone in bond, take it off a ship and put it back on another ship and then send it to the EU? It's like, again, what's the point of the EUDR at that point? So subject to reduced enforcement scrutiny. So even for high-risk commodities like cocoa, and again, the focus here is on cocoa because we're in cocoa, and the data I got, these quotes are edited from Cocoa Radar, the sources here, is that it turns out that if you go look at the commodities which are involved, soy, palm oil, and rubber, those three commodities are responsible for something like 80% of new deforestation. That coffee and cocoa are responsible for no more than 7% each, and beef and timber, I don't remember where they fall. I know it's in one of the other posts for one of my episodes of Pod Save Chocolate, what the percentage is. But it turns out that cocoa as a commodity is relatively low risk compared with the other commodities, the agricultural commodities, which are on the EUDR scrutiny list. So we've got this subject to reduced enforcement scrutiny, right? Which means that we need to look at how this is implemented in order to understand how the requirements. So right now they only need to audit 10% of all companies, and it's the 10% of companies that are the largest companies. Those are the ones who are tagged for enforcement. It's like, so what does this mean? Reduced enforcement scrutiny, right? So cleared for EU import without full traceability or deforestation risk assessment. So basically, the negligible risk loophole says the EUDR is meaningless, right? We've invested all this time, all this money, all this angst, all these promises, and we're basically going to say, no, we're not going to do any of the things that we promised to do, right? So you can imagine why a lot of people are justifiably really, really upset at the notion of the negligible risk loophole. So there's some other amendments. Again, the source here is Cocoa Radar. So the negligible risk classification is part of a broader package of revisions. So reuse of due diligence statements. So allowing one time a year filing rather than per shipment filing. So I could file one due diligence statement that might apply to something, right? But on average, maybe, right? It sets the system up, making it right for abuse, right? So the no risk country status is this even lighter touch category under which no due diligence is required. Again, and it's the transiting through which is an issue. Again, what would be the nearest low risk country, which is not an EU member, that I could ship my cocoa through before it got to a port in the EU? What's the point, right? So delayed or staggered implementation. So several member states, including Austria, Italy, and Luxembourg, have urged postponement of enforcement, citing competitiveness and administrative burdens. Oh yeah, they're just figuring out that they're going to have to spend a lot of money to upgrade their IT systems and hire and train a lot of people to do the due diligence. They're just figuring out this now with less than 6 months before the legislation is decided to go into effect. Now, there's already a delay. The EUDR goes into effect for companies above a certain size, December 3rd, so January 1st, 2026. It will go into effect for companies above a certain size. And I believe that cocoa, which is already in the EU, is grandfathered out of EUDR compliance, although a lot of the cocoa has been shipped that is being shipped into the EUDR, into the EU right now is EUDR compliant. But anything that is in the EU that is not EUDR compliant, as long as it arrived by December 31st, 2025, will be grandfathered in and there will be no inspections. So again, what's the point of all the kerfuffle associated with this? So who's also pushing for delays, right? So in addition to the EU ag minister saying, whoa, pump the brakes, right? And especially the Austria, Italy, and Luxembourg have said, whoa, let's let's pump the brakes on this because we're not ready, right? We've been pushing the governments of the cocoa producing countries to be ready for the deadlines. We've been pushing them to be ready, but we haven't been tending to our own knitting. We're not ready, so stop, right? So Mondelez is pushing for another 12 months delay. So Mondelez, headquartered in Chicago here in the US, it's the largest, snack confectionery candy company in the world. 90,000 employees, plants in lots of countries, like 35 billion in turnover US annually. It's the largest single company, right? And they're saying, you know what? We doubt that smallholder farmers will be ready, right? So we want you to delay this for 12 months because smallholder farmers aren't going to be ready. Like as if Mondelez, how much have they been contributing to EUDR compliance? Not entirely sure, but we're pushing responsibility off on the farmers, or we're not pushing responsibility. What we're doing is we're using the smallholder farmer as an excuse, right, for our not wanting to do the work and pay what is necessary for compliance, right? Right. Successful implementation must reflect on the ground realities, especially for smallholder farmers in the countries of origin. So, hey, we've all known about this for a bunch of years now, and give us a break. We're a $35 billion company. We're generating billions of profits every year. We're in all these countries all over the place, and yet we have concern for the smallholder farmer. We don't have concern for the smallholder farmers. We're using them as an excuse to delay our having to be responsible for this. And of course, if I were Mondelez, I'd say, let's forget about the delays. I don't care about the delays. Let's just make sure that all of our at-risk products, travel through a no-risk country before they go to the EU. And that includes paper for packaging. And if you're using soybeans for lecithin, and if you're using a palm kernel fraction for a cocoa butter equivalent or a cocoa butter replacement in your products, not for chocolate, but a chocolate adjacent product, you just transit all this sort of stuff, you just transit all these things through a no-risk country, and all of a sudden it auto-magically becomes exempt from any sort of enforcement. So, and makes no sense. But Lavazza is a coffee company, right? They're also pushing for it. I don't know what their reasons are for pushing the delay, but those are the challenges that we're certainly facing. So who is against the delays? So Mars, right? So again, this is one of the three largest snack chocolate confectionery candy companies in the world, although a lot of their turnovers have to do with pet foods and things like that. So things which are not in the human food categories. So Mars has said, you know what? We are opposing any more delays. We have done the work. We have spent the money, right? You've said December 31st, January 1st. Let's go for it. Anybody who's not ready for it, it's their problem, not ours. But Nestle, again, one of the top 10 companies in the world in this segment. Tony's, that makes sense given what they're all about. Ferrero and Unilever, they're against opposing any more delays. And Hershey, which rounds out the triumvirate of 3 of the 10 largest snack candy confectionery companies in the world, which are located in the United States, headquartered in the United States. Hershey has not taken a public stance on this. So if you want to know more about what the EUDR is all about, you can go to this regulation on deforestation-free products. And then if we can scroll up to the top here, again, we're going to type in EUDR. I believe that it is this post with Anthony Fountain. Oh, by the way, this is a photo that I took in Bolivia in 2010. Around the town of Cuernavaca. I was there with Volker Lehmann. I thought I'd do that. And this shows, land which is right next to a national park, which has been cut down, being used for agricultural land, and it is in really, really bad shape. But I believe, this is episode 9. we're talking about, oh yeah, here it is. So oil palm tops the list at 34% of deforested lands, soy at 32.8, timber 8.6, cocoa 7.5, coffee 7%, and cattle 5. So we're looking at the three top commodities, soy and oil palm, that's 66%. So it's like 72, 73% of all new deforestation. So lumping coffee and cocoa into that list is a little bit disingenuous. But that's why I'm going to put the links to these posts in the post for today's episode. And then you can hear my interview with Anthony about him and his thoughts. Anthony is the executive director of Voice Network, which is an activist organization which is promoting the rights of farmers and cocoa farmers particularly. And he's also one of the advisors on the chocolate scorecard team. So just a little bit of connection there. So this is really what I wanted to say to highlight what's going on with the EUDR. There was a vote a couple of weeks ago, right? The vote is to amend the EUDR legislation. It's around changing the risk tiering system specifically to add negligible risk and no risk categories to it. And that would enable, which if the EU, so this is a non-binding resolution, if the legislation is changed to adopt the negligible risk and no risk categories, it basically means all of the teeth, all of the fangs, all of the enforcement ability of the EUDR to affect change will have been removed from the legislation. And this is where I want to get into a question, which I asked over on LinkedIn this morning, which is, can we make an analogy? And this is the straw man that I mentioned at the very beginning. Can we make an analogy between fair trade, the fair trade movement, and the EUDR with respect to what I call socially acceptable economic imperialism? So if you've been a listener over the last year, you've probably heard me talk about this before. But what I want to say is, one way to think about fair trade is that it is a form of socially acceptable economic imperialism. And by that I mean, we here and again, I'm going to use loaded, perhaps not politically correct language, but it's a bunch of people in the global north, by which I mean people in the EU and the United States primarily. A bunch of people in the global north have finally got some ethics around exploiting brown people in the global south. Right? So we've got some ethics, and we feel bad after systemic and systematic exploitation of farmers in producing countries in tropical regions around the world. So we now have got some ethics, and we're feeling bad. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to these farmers in these countries, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, we've got this idea, right? It's called fair trade. And what we're going to do as a part of this fair trade is we're going to find a way for you farmers to earn more money than you've been earning, and maybe even a living income. Right? After all this systemic exploitation, we've come up with this idea. And here's all you have to do, right? You have to adopt our ethics and employ our systems to document what you're doing. So you have to document, right, that you're not exploiting the land. You have to document that you're not exploiting children. You have to document all this kind of stuff. You have to prove it. Oh, and guess what? You have to pay us, right? Because what we're going to do is, after we give you the checklist of things that you need to document, we're going to send people to audit whether or not, we can check all those things off the list, right? So we're going to ask you to pay for the privilege in quotes, I'm being sarcastic, in a sort of reductio ad absurdum kind of way. We're going to make you pay for the privilege of adopting our new ethics, right? But here's the catch. We're not going to accept any of the market responsibility. Right? We're not going to guarantee to purchase every cocoa bean or coffee bean or any product. We're not going to guarantee to purchase Fair Trade Foundation or the Fair Trade Organization, FLO, the Fair Trade Licensing Organization. We are not going to guarantee to purchase 100% of the product that is grown on fair trade terms at the fair trade price. We're just not, right? We're going to leave you with all the market risk. We'll help you market it because we got this campaign. We're going to try to get people to want to buy fair trade stuff. But here's what we've done is by using the word fair in this is we've conned people to believing that, our ethics, which we're imposing, but we're not really imposing because we're getting them to voluntarily, take on the obligations, but pay for the privilege without, right, guaranteeing that they will be compensated for all of their work, right? That's what I refer to as socially acceptable economic imperialism. We have made it okay to keep the smallholder farmer down on the smallholder farm, right? We've given people the appearance of acceptability by calling it living income. Like, who are we? Who is somebody up in Bonn, right? Or somebody in Oakland, right? What is their right to tell a farmer, living in Cross River State in Nigeria or outside Ibadan in Nigeria, or north of Lome, or in Kumasi in Ghana? Who are they? Who are these people to tell the farmer what is fair and what is a living income, right? It is socially acceptable economic imperialism, right? You may disagree with me, right? I'm not going to say that fair trade is universally bad, right? But there is no guarantee that all of the benefits which have been promised by fair trade are delivered by fair trade. And one of the ways you know this is that while there's an enormous amount of responsibility for reporting from the farm up to Fair Trade Foundation, there's actually no concomitant responsibility for fair trade to guarantee that all of the money that is paid in fair trade premiums actually is used in ways that are consistent with fair trade regulations. There is no concomitant downstream reporting capability. And that's one of the ways you can tell that there's a problem here. Follow the money. Right? So we can look at the LIRP, the living income reference price. I've talked about that in a recent episodes related to Tony's Choco Lonely. And so it's very, very nuanced, right? So it's not a one size fits all solution. It works for some places, it doesn't work for other places. But in general, what it does is it makes people who buy the finished products, I can go into a store, I can find the little fair trade label, which is on the front of a package, and I can feel good because the product has been produced fairly. Right? And we want to be very careful about accepting that at face value. I am encouraging everybody who watches this to go and think about what fair means and what ethical means, and how do fair and ethical, if they're top-down imposed, right? Even if there is cosplay around getting all these people involved in making the decision, right? If you've got Mondelez sitting at the table, well, Mondelez may not be the best example, but if you've got some very, very large company that buys a lot of cocoa, right, is sitting down at the table helping negotiate the quote unquote fair trade premium price, right? The whole thing exerts negative price pressure on what the premium is, right? Because, I'm in Ghana, I don't want the premium in Ghana to be 12 cents a kilo when next door in the Ivory Coast it's 10 cents per kilo, right? Because that puts my cocoa at a disadvantage. So I'm going to settle for 10 cents a kilo, and everybody will settle for 10 cents a kilo. I'm making that number up, but the whole negotiation process does exert negative price pressure. It makes it easier for the fair trade organization to oversee what's going on, because they don't have to think about different rates in their premium for different countries. So it's convenient for the people who are enforcing the system, but it's inconvenient for the farmers who live under the system and contribute to it. So what does all that got? Hey, Clay, you've been ranting on about fair trade. What has that got to do with the EUDR, right? And I'm going to suggest that there are a lot of similarities that certainly I didn't think about until this information about the vote that got taken on July 9th caused me to start thinking about it, which is one way to think about the EUDR is, hey, we in Europe, right, are concerned about deforestation in producing countries and around the world, right? And we are concerned about commodities for which we don't have much risk of deforestation anymore. We don't grow soy. We do grow soy, small amounts in the United States. We do. I don't know how much is in Europe. They're not growing coffee. They're not growing cocoa. There is some cattle farming. There's a lot of timber. So some of the EU member states have got a real issue associated with timber and the UDR. And they're not doing much in the other commodities which are being regulated. But we here in the EU are concerned about deforestation, and we're turning our eyes towards these producing countries in the tropical region, the quote unquote global south. Up here in the global north, we're above the people in the global south. And that's one of the reasons why many people think that global north, global south, and developed nation and developing nation should be eradicated from the vocabulary. So I like producing countries, countries where commodities are produced, cocoa, coffee, and then consuming countries, countries that take these commodities and either consume them directly or transform them into other things. And a producing country can also be a consuming country, and the consuming country can also be a producing country, depending upon what's going on. But it provides, it's not loaded language, is the point to be made here. But hey, we're here in the EU, we're concerned about deforestation, and so, but we don't have to worry about deforestation anymore. It's demonstrably insignificant, right? Because we're not deforesting anymore. All the deforestation we did in the 20th century or the 19th century or the 16th century. We're done with the deforestation. But you guys down there, you guys are, to meet up with the demand that we've created for your products, you guys need to do this deforesting stuff. So we've got this new ethics, and what we're asking you guys, right, the governments and the individual farmers and all of the actors who are in these producing countries, we're asking you to, we're not asking you, we are forcing you to accept our new ethics, right? And we're going to force you to accept this, because if you don't accept our ethics, you're going to be, the companies are going to be fined, or there's the potential to say, we're just going to refuse your products at the border. You no longer going to have access to EU market. So we're using our market strength. We're using the fact that we're the consumer. We control whether or not your product is going to make it to market or not, right? So this is not fair. This is bullying, right? But we've made it socially acceptable because it's all about saving the planet and climate change and deforestation and all the things related to it, right? Oh, and guess what, right? All of the costs of implementing, right, our regulations, right, you have to pay for. You, the government of Ghana, you, the government of Cote d'Ivoire, you, the government of Nigeria, you, the individual smallholder farmer, you, OLEM, you, Calabat, you, all of these companies, civil society, all these NGOs, you're the ones who have to pay for the cost of doing it if you want access to our market. Right? So we're using our market power, right, to bully you into submission, right? And for the most part, people have said, yeah, we want to sell our products into the EU, and so we're going to do our best to comply with the regulations, even though there's some wiggle room in terms, we don't exactly, what the deadlines are and how it's going to work and all this other kind of stuff. Right. And, is Brussels or is Belgium going to implement cocoa import rules the same way the Netherlands is? Or, do I have to, would it be better for me because Italy has got less stringent rules? Would I get it to La Spezia or some other port in Italy rather than getting it to Antwerp first? I mean, because, Italy may be more favorable in the way they look at these things. It's like all sorts of stuff, which is unclear. Right. So the EU says to the EU member states, you figure it out. We've got this framework, but you need to figure it out. So there's this also bullying of the member states. And here's the last part of this, which is the connection back. The EU says, we're not taking any responsibility for this. Oh, and by the way, we've forced the entire industry, the entire sector, all of the actors in anything having to do with palm oil, soy, coffee, timber, right? Coffee, cocoa, beef. We've forced you guys to jump through these hoops, pay millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. The estimate is the cost of EUDR compliance on a metric ton of cocoa is about 200 euros. So 200 euros, right? And that's on top of, maybe it's on top of whatever the high price of cocoa is right now, right? That you add that 200 euros per metric ton on top of that. Maybe it's priced in, it depends upon all sorts of things. But it is not insignificant how much it has been costing and how much it will continue to cost to maintain EUDR compliance, right? And then the EUDR, right? The EU, not the EUDR, but the EU member state goes, oops, after forcing all of you guys to jump through hoops and to spend all of this money, right? We dropped the ball, right? Our information management systems are not ready. Our human resources systems are not up to the task. We haven't done the work we need to do in order to be able to handle the amount of data that is going to be collected, right? And is going to be that we need to manage and we need to examine forensically for clues as to whether or not this company is actually reporting accurately. Are they meeting their reporting requirements under the EUDR? And how are those reporting requirements affected by the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and the related directives which are associated with the EUDR? So after all of this stuff that's going on, the EU is going, we're not ready. We're not ready. We're not ready. And they tried to create this kind of socially acceptable economic imperialism. Well, imperium is a pretty interesting way of thinking about it as well. But what they've said is, we're up here, right? We have market power. We have decided that deforestation in your countries is a bad thing. Deforestation in your countries, deforestation that we did over the last 500 years, but that doesn't count because it happened 500 years ago or last century or during World War II. How much deforestation happened, right, during World War II? In any event, right? It's not a problem where we are, it's a problem where you are. And we're going to use deforestation and its contribution to climate change as an excuse to enact this this regulatory framework. And we're going to make you pay for it. We're going to make you pay for the privilege. And it's not just pay for it up front, but we're going to make you pay for it on an ongoing basis, right? And none of that money is involved in any way, right, in making sure that the IT systems are sufficient, right, either at the EU in the Home Office or in the offices in each of the member states where the data are going to have to be collected and processed, analyzed, and then a determination of what the fines are going to be. And it's not even clear to me, again, I haven't read the legislation that closely, if a company is fined, who gets the fine? Or who is paid the fine? Is it paid to the EU? And if it's paid to the EU into a general account, how is it distributed? So there is also that issue. But the fines can be quite substantive in terms of if you are found not to be in compliance with the EUDR or any of the related directives. And so that's why I call it socially acceptable economic imperialism. We have taken something that many people are concerned about, not everyone, climate change, right? An aspect of climate change, which is anthropogenic. Oh, it is deforestation in some areas, which is a contributor to climate change, maybe a major contributor, maybe not, right? We've arbitrarily chosen a deadline that say deforestation that happened before then doesn't count. We're only worried about deforestation, which happened after a certain date. Right? And we're saying we're using our market power. We here in Europe are using our market power around this thing, which has suddenly become important to us, right? And we're going to force you to change the way you operate in order to meet our requirements. And guess what? we're not going to pay for any of it. You're going to have to pay for all of it, right? And then we still have the right of refusing if we think for one reason or another that you're not in compliance with the regulations, which are not very clearly understood. And the ultimate irony, of course, of all of this is, whoa, up here, in the EU, we haven't really thought about what that means. And so we're not prepared. So, hey, slow down, give us time. We're not ready. It's just the irony of it is just there's a bit of Schadenfreude in there, right? As somebody who's worked on large scale information systems and who's had to deal with tens of gigabytes, hundreds of gigabytes, petabytes of data in some of the work that I've done previously, it's just profoundly ironic that this is where the EU is. And then for the let's go back and take a look at this. For the legislative director, so the guy from Mondelez, okay. So for the European VP for Communications and Government Affairs, to say that the reason why it's pushing for a delay is because that smallholder farmers will not be ready, just shows how bankrupt Mondelez's position with respect to the EUDR has been and continues to be. To me, it appears to me that Mondelez's position is morally bankrupt. They have not, in fact, devoted the time and resources, right, both money and human resources necessary to figure out what their compliance requirements are going to be, right? And they are trying to use the farmers, right, as an excuse for their lack of readiness. I mean, I gotta say, it's for those of you who are following American politics, what the current president is doing, trying to point the finger of blame to other people right now. This is what Mondelez is doing, right? In trying to do that, they're trying to couch it in interesting terms. So, how is the EUDR like fair trade? They are both forms of socially acceptable, trying to make it socially acceptable, economic imperialism. And with that, I'm done for today. A little bit of it's a little shorter than many episodes are. If you're still watching and you have a comment or a question, do you agree with me? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think I'm right? Do you have a slightly different take on it? Let me know. I'm interested in knowing what you think about this. And what I want to do here is change this. If you are a member of the Chocolate Life, whether it's a free member or a premium member, what you can do is you can go to the bottom of any post on the Chocolate Life, and there will be a member discussion. So if you have a question and you want to keep that question going in the comments on the Chocolate Life, you can do that. I read every single one of the comments. The only restriction is you do have to be a member. Free member, it's fine. Premium member, if you can support the work that I do, because this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. I produce all this content, give it out there. For the most part, it's free. There are few posts which are limited to members only, but for the most part, all this content is free. And you can support me just becoming a member. If you're watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, push the bells. Follow me on LinkedIn if you're not already connected with me there. On Facebook, either at the Chocolate Life page on Facebook, or I operate a group which has more than 10,000 members. It's centered primarily, or at least most of the members are in Latin America. It is the Salones Internacionales de Cacao y Chocolate. You can become a member of that group and follow along what it is there. You can, promote your business, give us updates on what's going on in the country that you live in when it comes to cocoa and chocolate. All of those things are a part of what it is that I do at the Chocolate Life. And with that, we've come to an end of another episode. It is a Friday here. I hope everybody is planning to have a great weekend. And I want to remind everybody, as I do at the end of every episode, we may talk about some really serious issues, right? And today was one of those episodes where I'm talking about what I think is a really serious issue, a really important one. But it's always important to know that chocolate brings us great joy, that working with chocolate, sharing chocolate, eating chocolate, all of the things that are associated with chocolate does have this enjoyment component to it in one way or another. So it's important to remember that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.